I'm rewatching Outlander from the beginning. Let's talk about this scene between Dougal and Claire from episode 4 and how it builds upon their growing dynamic. As always, this will have spoilers for the books and the show, so if you are looking to avoid those, please do keep on scrolling. So in episode 4, titled The Gathering, we get the first real glimpse of the dynamic between Claire and Dougal, specifically after the events of the boar attack that we see on screen. In this scene, Claire does everything she can to save Dougal's friend Geordie, but when it becomes very clear to her that he is going to die, she doesn't shy away from it and instead stays with him, comforts him, and tries to ease his suffering as best she can, and Dougal sees that. In this moment when Dougal is offering Geordie his own version of comfort, Claire in the books makes this reference to how unusual it is to see Dougal, who's usually very fierce and ruthless, speaking to Geordie in a very low, comforting tone and hugging him, stroking his hair. It was very out of character for her to witness him like this. And Claire, unfortunately, has to assess the situation in this moment, and she identifies that the wound that he sustained to his abdomen was fatal. And even if she was in her own time with her tools, she's trapped in this time, and she really would only have garlic and yarrow root and all these other things that she references in the books, and has to be the one to tell Dougal that his friend is not going to make it. Now, in the books, as soon as Dougal hears this from Claire, he unties the tourniquet, and Claire and him have an unspoken moment where Dougal is kind of saying to her, we can keep him alive and bring him back to the castle, but it would drag out his death longer than needs to. And Claire has this same thought that what Dougal's offering him is more merciful and is the right thing to do rather than drag this out longer than it needs to go. And that's when Claire starts to join Dougal in giving Geordie words of comfort, telling him it will be better soon, the pain will be over soon, things like that. Now, one thing I did like that the show did differently was that Claire asks him more questions and starts to have that last conversation with him as he's starting to fade, and they draw upon this scene later on in different episodes with Claire, because this is something that we see her deal with time and time again, which is being the last person present for someone's final moments of their life. It's just this harsh reality that Claire is burdened with, and we see it compound over time and obviously take its toll on her in many different ways. But this is the first kind of example that we get to see of that, where she has to do this very difficult thing and then just is expected to walk away from it and carry on and help the next person that needs her help. In the show, this conversation between Dougal and Claire, where he, thanks her for allowing him to have a peaceful death and asks, you've seen men die before, and Claire confirms that. It plays out a little bit differently in the books. In the books, they have returned to Castle Leoch and they are bringing his body back, Geordie's body back, and they actually pass by the gate to the courtyard and see Father Bain, who is the priest that we see earlier in the show, and Dougal pauses in the corridor with Claire and says to her, you've seen men die before by violence. And it wasn't a question, it was an accusation in the book. And Claire says many of them. But interestingly, they don't have this conversation in the books where Dougal essentially thanks Claire for her kindness that she shows him, because in the book it's kind of implied that Dougal does a lot of that for Geordie. Claire only says about 2 things to him and allows Dougal to give him that death in the woods rather than bring him home. So they definitely tweaked this in the show, probably to give us a little bit more reason to feel sympathetic towards Dougal at this point, but we definitely don't get that in the books. A lot of the way they set up Dougal and Claire's dynamic in the show, I think, is also just to raise the stakes of the relationships that Claire has at this point. They've obviously in this episode as well, when he kisses her and he's drunk, tried to make it clear to us that he does have an attraction towards Claire. He, I think, is amazed by her, recognizes the strength that she has, her ability to face death without flinching. I think that's all very impressive to him, and he's enamored by her in many ways. This, to me, is the first time that Dougal actually recognizes Claire as someone who isn't just, this intruder. He's more interested in what is going on in her world and how she ended up this way, because I think as a warrior himself and someone who knows death so intimately, he understands that part of that is having courage, and Claire's actions in this scene on Dougal's end would imply to him that she is someone worthy of respecting, because he's been wary of her up until this point. He obviously wants to protect his clan, and Claire, as an outsider with a lot of mysterious knowledge, is obviously presenting herself as a threat in some ways. But the moment with the boar, I think, is what changes things for Dougal, and he values strength, both physical and emotional, and Claire isn't just clever, she's tough, and this is the first time he gets to see that on full display. And I don't think Dougal will ever care for Claire or trust Claire in the same way that Jamie does, obviously. But I think this is the first time he might understand her a bit more, and in his own way tries to protect her. Obviously, we know there's many times where he flip-flops his allegiances and has many self-interests, but I also think the standout moment for me is later on when she is taken to the garrison commander. He does put his neck out for her in a big way, and I don't think you can get to that point if he didn't have this sort of moment with Claire where he begins to respect her more and see value in her in that way. And obviously there's this looming undercurrent of him using her as a political means to an end, but I do think that in this scene we can see that there is also mutual respect. It's also important for me, I think, to note that he watches and observes Jamie and Claire a lot, and I think he has this kind of longing or understanding in watching the two of them together, because their relationship complicates everything, especially when it comes to Jamie, because Dougal, he respects Claire, he admires Claire's strength, but Jamie is still someone who is kind of like a thorn in his side politically. Jamie is bound to Claire at this point, and he's losing his influence on him as this season and the story goes on, and we see that come to a head in season 2. But in season 1, we also see how Dougal tries to tell Claire when Jamie is lost that he would marry her. But that is, I think, on the surface level because he's attracted to her, but the real reason is because she's set to inherit Fraser lands, and so if Dougal marries her, then he would get Fraser lands. So everything with him is kind of twofold. He has his own personal motivations, and then he has the motivations of the clan, especially where he's, Column's eyes and ears, like he says. So Dougal's a very complex character, and I really like how he is shown in the show. I think they give him a lot more to work with in the show, and I really, really love his portrayal, especially in this episode. It's the first time Dougal actually can see Claire as an asset, but I also think he recognizes that all the things that make her an asset also make her dangerous, not only to the clan, but to Dougal himself.